Hello everybody and welcome back to the channel. My name is Brianna and this is for Pause in a Book. I make book and lifestyle related content, so if that's something that you're interested in, make sure that you hit that subscribe button down below. Today I'm going to be talking about all of the books that I read in the month of October. I wanted to do one more video before I took down all of my spooky decorations, and so the October wrap-up seemed to be like the best avenue for that. So here we are. I had a really good reading month in the month of October in terms of books that I read. Not so much in the quality of books that I have read. And I think that that is just becoming a trend. I did have a 5-star read, but I had one 5-star read. And it's a 5-star read, but it's not one that I'm like singing from the rooftops or anything like that. I have not had a book that I have just been in love with since Ashes of the Sun in early September. And I just need a 5-star read. I just need a favorites book. I was actually working on my end of year content and my kind of stats and seeing where I was at for favorites of the year, worst of the year, that kind of thing. And I could immediately tell you 10 books that would be on the worst or most disappointing books of the year. But I still have 6 slots of books that I would consider a favorite of the year in a top 10. I don't have that many. And that's sad. This has just been an interesting year. I'm going to go into all of that later. This is not the video for that. This is just the video to talk about October. If you're new to my wrap-ups, at the end of the month, I do all of my stats, my nerdy things where I talk about my star ratings, how many genres I read, how many pages I read, all that stuff. If you're not a stats nerd, just go ahead and jump to when I start reviewing the books. I'll have timestamps down below. You can just start there if you don't want to hear about the stats. But if you're a nerd like I am, you've come to the right place. I read 19 books in the month of October. I also DNF'd one book. That comes to a grand total of 5,989 pages, which is, I think, my second best month of the year. I think my biggest month was around 7,000 pages. So, as far as books and pages read, fantastic. As far as getting books off of my TBR, fantastic. One of the reasons why I could be having a mediocre month, specifically in this month, in this instance, I was very all over the place when it comes to genres, and I was reading a lot out of my comfort zone. It is spooky month. I was trying to read the spooky books, and those are not my comfort books, okay? I like the fantasy and the romance. I don't necessarily do the horror, but I only read 1 contemporary, 1 fantasy, 1 historical, 8 horror books, 1 mystery, 5 romances, and 2 sci-fi. I also read 12 books via audio, which is a lot for me. It was 12 books via audio, 1 ebook, and 6 physical books. I'm reading more and more audio, and that's just a trend that I'm kind of going towards. I'm struggling, especially at the end of the year, as my mental health is kind of all over the place, to really sit down and focus on physically reading something. So it was really hard for me to physically read this month. So I really gravitated towards audiobooks. That could also have played a factor in my mediocre reading month. I don't know. I read 11 books targeted at an adult audience, 4 books at a middle grade audience, and 4 at a YA audience. As far as my ratings are concerned, like I said, I did have 1 5-star. I had 2 4.5-star reads. I had 5 4-star reads, which is a lot. And I mean, that's still a good book. I had 3 3.5-star reads. I had 4 3-star reads, 3 2.5-star reads, 0 2 stars, 0 1.5 stars, and 1 1-star read. And that was my first book of the month. So it really just kicked everything off to a not great start. I read 2 books by a debut author, 8 from authors that I had read before, and 9 books from authors that were new to me, but this was not their debut work. Without further ado, let's talk about the books that I read in the month of October. Like I said, I did do a mid-month wrap-up, and so if you would like my detailed thoughts about the books that I read at the beginning of the month, go ahead and check that video out up there. I will just kind of briefly talk about them here, otherwise this video is going to be an hour long, and we ain't here for that, okay? The first book I'm going to talk about is my DNF. I did talk about this one already. That is Into the Midnight Void. This is a YA fantasy, and I just don't think that the book was well written. I think it was very rushed, and there was a lot of time jumps, and then we would tell, the author was trying to tell us what happened in the time jump, but that would have been a better story. So I only made it about 50 pages in. I don't know that I'm going to continue it. I think at the mid-month point I said that I might come back to it. Only because it was a book that I was going to be using for the Our Fantasy Bingo board, but I found an alternative for that, so I don't think we're gonna continue on with this. I think I might just unhaul it. My 1-star read I did talk about because it was the first book I read. It was Not the Witch You Wed by April Asher. This book was bad. It will end up on my, speaking of worst books of the year, it will end up there. Just go watch that wrap up for that. I can't continue ranting about this book. I had 3 2.5-star reads. One of them I talked about in my mid-month wrap-up, and that was Black Tide by Casey Jones. This is a end of the world dystopian sci-fi horror. It has some paranormal elements. It has supernatural elements, definitely sci-fi. I just didn't find any of the characters likable, enjoyable to read from, wanted to root for them at all. The hero was this very mediocre white man, and he was gonna save the world. So I didn't really like this one that much. These books will all be on Pango, and my Pango bookshop is down below, so if you are interested in any of these, I don't know why you would be after listening to my thoughts. Maybe. I don't know. Maybe these are buzzwords for you. You can check out my shop down below. My next 2.5-star read was The Deep by Alma Katsu. I did talk about this one in my spooky books that you chose for me. This was one of the 3 that I read for that, and I think that this book is just heavily mismarketed, okay? This is marketed as Ghost on the Titanic, and this horror book that takes place on the Titanic, this paranormal book. And it really wasn't that. It was really a historical fiction book that had a whisper of ghosts. It's just a little bit. And so I think if you're a fan of historical fiction, specifically surrounding the Titanic, this might be a great book for you. But it was not for me, unfortunately. I don't read historical. This might have been my 2nd or 3rd historical book that I've read all year long. It's just not a genre that I gravitate towards, and it's not really a genre that I enjoy reading from. As when I am actually reading it, I don't enjoy it. And this book had some pacing problems. We would start getting some tension, and then we would start talking about a romance, and it would just kill any tension that we had. And it has the opportunity and the potential to be really good, but unfortunately, it just did not live up to its expectations. So if you want to hear my live thoughts on it, like I said, I was vlogging the spooky books that you chose, and this was one of them. So I have live in-depth thoughts as I'm reading the book. 2.5 stars, also unhauling this. My last 2.5 stars was Mating the Huntress by Talia Hibbert. Talia Hibbert is one of my favorite authors. She is an auto-buy author for me. She's one of the greatest romance writers, at least in my humble opinion. This was not my favorite book of hers. And that's fine. That is okay. It hurt me a lot to say that I didn't like a book from her because, I feel like I should like all of her books, but I didn't. And I think part of the reason is that, I don't love paranormal romances. I specifically do not love werewolf romances. Shifter romances are just not my thing. I've never really found a book that I liked that was a werewolf and or shifter romance. It's just I haven't found it. It could be out there, but I haven't found it yet. I also, it took me so long to read this book, which shouldn't have happened because it's, honestly a novella, but I was just, I never wanted to pick it up. This book is about a werewolf shifter woman who works in a coffee shop, and then she has this kind of enemies to lovers romance with this other werewolf who's, I guess, in a different clan, something like that. She's trying to kill him, and he is no, you're my mate. And I think one of the reasons why I don't love the werewolf romance is because it does have that fated mate trope, which is one of my least favorite tropes. I can't get past it. It's kind of it takes out any type of free will and choice, and sometimes a little consent, honestly. This one did not have any consent problems or anything like that. However, I have read them before. Unfortunately, this just wasn't for me. If you like werewolf romances, I think that this is fantastic because Talia Hibbert does know how to write a romance. Her sex scenes are amazing, her smut, her spice, it's all there, and it has the bones of Talia. It's just the actual topic was not for me, but I'm trying to read all of her backlist, so I had to check this one off. Moving on to my 3-star reads. I talked about 2 of them already in my mid-month wrap-up. The first one was Crenshaw by Catherine Applegate. This is a middle grade contemporary that I thought was horror because it had a spooky looking cat on it, and it it's not horror. This is about a boy who has fallen on really hard times, or his family has fallen on really hard times. They're going to be homeless, and he's just trying to deal with that, and his imaginary friend from his childhood comes back into the picture. This book, I think, just like misses its target audience. I think the information in it is a little bit too scary for like a lot of middle grades, not in the horror sense, but in the oh my god, are we gonna lose our home too kind of aspect. Like, it's definitely a book that you have to have a conversation with after you give it to your child. The other one was Night of the Mannequins by Stephen Graham Jones. This is a novella. It's a horror novella about a prank gone horribly wrong, and it just wasn't the book for me. I have read other things from Stephen Graham Jones and actually really liked them, so it's not his writing. I just didn't love the novella aspect of this. I wanted more from the story, and it just didn't get it. I also gave 3 stars to Long Live the Pumpkin Queen by Shea Ernshaw, and this book I read in one day. I buddy read it with Kaylee from Kaylee's Books, and we both really didn't like it, which is really sad because a lot of people really loved it. Like, up until that point, I hadn't seen anyone that didn't like it. But to me, this read like really poorly written fan fiction. Like, you have to know the bones of Nightmare Before Christmas before reading this book. You cannot read this book on its own. But it's just like, it's not big enough. It's not like out there enough. It's just about Sally going into this dreamland and trying to fight the Sandman, essentially. But like, you don't really get to see the other characters that are in Nightmare Before Christmas, because like they all get put under the spell of the Sandman. And it's just like, the book was fun. It's a book that exists and I read it. I don't have a lot of great things to say about it though. Like, the vibes are there, the atmosphere is kind of there, but I do think that like, if you hadn't watched Nightmare Before Christmas, you'd be really lost. Like, this book is for die-hard fans of Nightmare Before Christmas. And it's like a little bit of an epilogue to Nightmare Before Christmas. I mean, I like that movie, but I don't need this book. I do think that Shea Ernshaw really did capture the vibes of Tim Burton, and I do think that, like, of anyone to write this type of book, I think Shea Ernshaw would kind of be one of the few authors that I would kind of trust with that world. But it's still like, it's just vibes. But that's all it was. There was not a lot to it. I also gave 3 stars to Hell Followed With Us by Andrew Joseph White. I actually am going to have a dedicated vlog for this and 2 other books coming out next week, so stay tuned for that. I'll have more in-depth live thoughts for this. This book, I can totally see the appeal in it. This is a YA, another like kind of dystopian horror novel. It does leave a lot of room for growth. I think that the author definitely has some bones here and has a lot of room to grow. I didn't really understand the world of this book. This is essentially about a trans boy who is trying to fight the zombie apocalypse, essentially. Like, there's this plague happening, and he's also trying to like escape this cult. There was so much going on in this story that I wasn't sure what was going on in the story, and the other thing was that the body horror was just like every page. Every single page. And so it became a little bit like gratuitous, I guess is the word. It kind of lost its power and its like shock value because it was so much. I see the appeal of this, especially for people that like YA horror books. Just go into it knowing that the characters are very YA. There's a lot of drama going on between characters. And one of the things that bugs me the most about YA dystopian or horror books is they're so like caught up in relationships and friendships and like the other people surrounding them at the end of the world. And like, I get the drama and the stuff going on with the people around you in a YA contemporary. I get that. But when the world is literally crashing down around you, that is the least of your problems. And I don't know. Maybe I'm too old for these books now. I don't know. If this year has taught me anything, it is that like I am going to be very selective about the YA that I choose going forward. I just haven't found a YA book that I absolutely love. So it's not going to be a genre that I pick up that much going forward. And you know what? That's okay. That's okay. I'm in my 30s here. Moving on to my 3.5-star reads. One of them I talked about in my mid-month wrap-up, and that was The House of Hollow by Krista Sutherland. Again, a completely vibes book. This is about a girl who, her and her sisters disappeared and came back a month later. And then, like, her sister goes missing again, and she's trying to find her. This has a lot of paranormal aspects to it. It has a lot of witchiness to it. And again, like, this book is all vibes. A lot of the book I didn't know what was going on, though. I also gave 3.5 stars to The Murder of Mr. Wickham by Claudia Gray. I do have a dedicated reading vlog for this as well, but I read a book that Michelle picked based solely on the cover. It kind of worked, I guess. I mean, I like this book. This is Jane Austen meets Agatha Christie's The Mousetrap. That is what this book is. Like, if you just took all of Jane Austen's characters and put it into Agatha Christie's world and had a little murder mystery, that is what this book is. Essentially, they're all there for a little party, and Mr. Wickham shows up. He has beef with pretty much everyone because of one reason or another, and we go through a third of the book, like, finding out why this character doesn't like Wickham and why this character has the problems with Mr. Wickham. So everyone in the house ends up becoming a suspect when Mr. Wickham is found dead. I had a really good time with it. Not a favorite book of the year or anything like that, but a solid 3.5 stars. My rating system probably seems really all over the place. Like, 3 stars and down, like, I don't really recommend. 3.5 stars and up, it's a solid book. I lied. I had one more 3.5 star read. I'm actually dropping this rating in the mid-month wrap-up. I called it a 4-star read, but kind of like upon further inspections, I'm dropping it down to 3.5 stars, and that's The Kiss Curse by Erin Sterling. This was my Patreon book club book of the month. We're going to be talking about it on a live. This was a good book. It's not as good as The Ex-Hex for sure. I also find it really weird that like, the main character in this is the cousin of the main character in The Ex-Hex, and so those cousins are going to be dating brothers. And that just feels weird. I don't know. There wasn't a lot of, like, build-up between these two, and the characters just, like, never really had meaningful conversations together, and I was kind of noticing that as I kind of finished the book. I read this book in one day, so it felt like there was, but looking back on it, their conversations felt very surface level. So I'm going to drop this one down to 3.5 stars. It was still a fun fall read. Moving on to my 4-star reads. Like I said, I had 5 of them. 2 of them I talked about in my mid-month wrap-up. The first one was White Smoke by Tiffany D. Jackson. This is a YA horror that I actually really did enjoy. And it all takes place at this, like, haunted house. It's very atmospheric. It's also deals a lot with mental health. And I think the representation of that was really good. And then I also gave 4 stars to Small Spaces by Catherine Arden. And I did talk about this one. This is the first book in a quartet that's a middle grade horror. And then I'm going to talk about this as well. I read Dead Voices in the second half of the month. And this is the winter version of it. And I gave this one 4 stars as well. I actually really like this series. I think that it was a lot of fun. It's, like, very atmospheric spooky. And one of the things that I talked about before with middle grade horror, you have to really rely on the, like, atmosphere and the world building in a spooky book, because you can't have jump scares, you can't have, like, blood and gore in a middle grade horror, because that's just not the audience for it. So you have to rely on the thing around the corner, the shadow in the dark, and, like, this just, like, kind of build on this atmosphere of creepiness. So this one takes place at a scarecrow farm, or like a corn farm with a bunch of scarecrows, and the scarecrows come alive, and then they have to, like, go through the mist. They have a little adventure there. This one takes place at a ski resort, and, like, I love winter horror, like, when it's cold and dark, because, like, you know, it starts to get dark really early, and there is some, like, grim, like, darker fairy tale lore in this one as well. If I'm ranking them, I think I liked this one better than this one. There is a trigger for this one, for, like, the aftermath of a death of a parent. They really talk about how one of the kids, their parent has died, and they really kind of have to grapple with, like, the aftermath of that, and, like, dealing with, like, not having your mom around, which is really, you know, really sad for 10 or 11-year-old. So there's trigger warning for that. The other 4-star reads I did talk about in my spooky books that you chose TBR or vlog. So the first one was Court of a Vampire Queen by Katie Robert. This one is a bind-up of 3 novellas from Katie Robert that is, like, this paranormal vampire romance. And while I said that I don't like werewolf romance, like that type of paranormal romance, I really liked this. And part of that is just because it is Katie Robert. I love her romances. But let me tell you, this book has, like, this much plot. It has a ton of spice. Like, literally every few pages, we're doing it. This is about a woman who is half human, half vampire, or at least that's what she is at the beginning. That's what you're told that she is. And she is sold to 3 vampires by her father, to basically, like, trap them into a life with her, basically, like, trying to extend their bloodline, you know, knock her up. And then she ends up kind of like fighting back, and like, you know, with the 3 men that she ends up falling in love with, like fighting back against her father. It does have kind of a similar premise to like Desperate Measures, and like some of her other romances. Like, it's a very formulaic book in the fact that like it's all smut, and then the very last chapter is like, you know, rounds out the plot. So if you're not a fan of Katie Robert, don't pick this book up. It's not a book that you're gonna like. But if you're just here for a good time and you want to read a lot of smut, this is the book. Then the other 4-star book that I read was Dead Silence by S.A. Barnes. This book I'm rating as high as I am for the vibes, for the atmosphere, for the world building. I think like on my rating scale, that's got a 5 on its world building. On its plot, it was not quite as high. And like, it has a freaking unnecessary romance. It's again with the spooky books that have like, we're building tension and then just kidding, let's kiss. And I don't need that in a horror book. Like, if I wanted to read romance, I would have read a romance. If I wanted to be creeped out, like, that's why I'm reading a horror. Like I said, I kind of go into a rant about it in my vlog, so you can check that out there. This book is about the crew of a spaceship who gets a distress call from another ship. Come to find out that ship has been abandoned for decades, so it just kind of becomes a salvage mission. And then when they go on to that ship, there are some supernatural things, possibly, maybe, perhaps. I talked about this in the vlog, but one of my favorite things about both sci-fi horror and like underwater horror is the fact that your brain can play so many tricks on you that can be terrifying, right? Because like the oxygen level is running low and like your brain starts making things up, right? So this entire time, it's like, is she seeing a ghost, or is it her brain just playing tricks on her? You're in her head the entire time, and so it's like, it's terrifying. So I really, really liked that aspect of this book. Moving on to my 4.5-star reads, I had 2 of them. I did talk about both of them in my mid-month wrap-up, but we'll quickly wrap them up. I had Horror Store by Grady Hendrix. This is really fun. This kind of takes place in like an IKEA. The whole book kind of just looks like an IKEA catalog. Like we talk about, there's like a employee evaluation. The audiobook is really creepy. In the parts where it's like reading the employee handbook, he does it in a very monotoned, like HR video kind of way. So this was a lot of fun. It is about a bunch of employees that end up having to stay overnight in an Orsk, not an IKEA. Is it Orsk? Yeah, Orsk. They think something's happening in there overnight, and so they are trying to catch whatever is going on. So then, on the opposite side of not being creepy, we had Mistakes Were Made by Meryl Wilsner. This is a age gap sapphic forbidden romance. It is about a woman who comes back to her daughter's college town for like parent night, parent weekend, whatever, meets a woman at a bar, and then the next morning meets her again at breakfast with her daughter, because the woman is her best friend, the daughter's best friend. Then there's like this whole forbidden romance, like that spans almost the course of a year, through text, and there's so much angst in this book. There's so much like pining, like, you know, it's very taboo, and I think that the author did a really good job with like making it at the very, like at the end, everyone's happy. Like there's no one that like gets left behind in this scenario or gets the short end of the stick. So I was really concerned that the author wasn't going to be able to do that well, and I think they really did. So, and then my 5-star read, I did also talk about in my mid-month wrap-up, so I'll briefly talk about it here. I haven't had a lot of like amazing books this month, last couple months. It's fine. Don't worry about it. We have Upgrade by Blake Crouch. Here's the thing about Blake Crouch's books. First off, they are kind of predictable. They are kind of like forgettable after you read them, but they're so addicting while you're reading it. You know, while I was reading this book, I was obsessed with it. It does talk about DNA and like genomes and like trying to modify DNA, and that's something that's fascinating to me as someone who works in STEM and like has always had a fascination for science. I found that really interesting. And the thing is, and this is why I say that his books can kind of be forgettable, is that if you go back and watch my mid-month wrap-up, I was obsessed with this book. And then we've gone 2 weeks, and I really can't tell you much about this book. And I don't think it will, I mean, it's not going to end up on a favorite books of the year. And the interesting thing about Blake Crouch's books in the past that have ended up on my favorite books of the year, both Dark Matter and Recursion, both did in 2020 and 2021, I think, or in 2019 and 2020, whatever year I read it in. They both ended up on my favorite books of the year. However, I read them both in December. And so, like, I'm making my list for the end of the year right after reading this book. And I think that's the thing about Blake Crouch's book, is they're very addicting as you're reading it, and you're obsessed with it as you're reading it, but then, like, you go 2 weeks, and I'm like, it's fine. It was a good book, but it's not something that I'm, like, dying over, right? Dark Matter might be a exception to that rule, because I think that there are times that I still think about that book, even though it's been several years since I've read it. I wonder if it would be the same if I read it again. Someone said after reading this book that your first Blake Crouch is always your favorite, and I do think that is true. Dark Matter is probably my favorite of the 3, and that was the first one that I read. I did just order Pines, which is his older book, and I kind of want to see how that goes. It's an experiment. We're going to try it. So that is all of the books that I read in the month of October. Let me know down in the comments below what your favorite book of the month is. And if you're not feeling chatty, you can do a ghost emoji, because, you know, we're finishing up spooky season. That is all I have for you today. If you're new here and you have not yet subscribed, there's a little red button that you can do so down below the video. If you'd like to hang out with me more, I have links to my Instagram, Twitter, Goodreads, and my very own Patreon linked in the description below. You can check everything out there. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you next time.